Stand up.
I can stand, but my knees are bad. What is this about?
Okay, then let me see your ID.
I'm waiting on family inside. I'm just sitting here. What law am I breaking?
Officer, what do you want from me? Stay back. We're handling it.
No, we won't go anywhere unless you step back.
You're trying to arrest an old man for sitting outside a hospital.
Racial profiling turned into a civil rights case when 3 officers approached an elderly black man sitting outside a hospital, treated him like a suspect from the first second, and tried to turn a public bench into grounds for detention. No emergency was happening, no threat was visible. Nothing about the man's behavior suggested danger. The only thing wrong was that he was an old black man sitting quietly where everyone could see him, and the officers decided that was enough to start pushing. Before we rewind, tell me where you're watching from, country or state, in the comments. And if you stay for stories where people get held accountable when they abuse power, like the video and subscribe. This happened outside Northgate Medical Center on a weekday afternoon. People were coming and going through the main entrance. Patients stepped outside for air. Families waited near the curb for rides. A few staff members took breaks near the doors. Security cameras were mounted above the walkway, and hospital security was nearby, but not involved. Eddie Marshall was 72. He had arthritis in his knees and moved carefully when he had to stand. That day, he was waiting on a family member inside. The waiting room had been crowded, and he needed a quiet place to sit. He chose a bench near the entrance because it was public, close, and safe. He wasn't panhandling, shouting, or bothering anyone. He sat upright, looked at his phone now and then, and watched the flow of people. A patrol SUV pulled up and stopped along the curb. A second unit came in behind it. 3 officers got out quickly and walked straight toward Eddie without pausing to scan the area or speak to hospital security. Their body language looked like a confrontation was already decided. Officer Brant Hale led. He closed the distance fast and stopped close enough to Eddie that it forced Eddie to look upward. Officer Ryan Kessler moved to Eddie's side to limit his space. Officer Marcy Dugan stayed slightly back, watching and listening, ready to step in when needed. Hale opened with a demand for identification and an immediate challenge about why Eddie was there. The tone was sharp and impatient, as if Eddie had already been caught doing something. Eddie answered in a calm voice and explained he was waiting on someone inside and needed to sit down for a while. Hale did not accept the explanation. He repeated the ID demand, then added pressure by suggesting Eddie was refusing to cooperate. Kessler backed Hale up, stepping closer and speaking over Eddie when Eddie tried to ask what the issue was. Eddie kept his hands visible and stayed respectful. He asked what law he was breaking and why he was being treated like this. None of the officers gave him a clear reason. Instead, Hale kept framing the situation as something Eddie needed to fix by complying, even though Eddie hadn't done anything that required correction. More people began to notice. A couple near the entrance slowed down. Someone in scrubs paused by the doors. A visitor near the curb looked over and stayed watching. Eddie was now in the middle of a public scene, with 3 officers standing close and speaking at him like he was a problem they needed to control. Hale ordered Eddie to stand up. That order mattered because Eddie had not been doing anything physical or disruptive. Standing him up changed the situation from a conversation into a physical setup. Eddie hesitated and explained he had knee pain. Hale insisted again, and Kessler shifted his stance as if preparing for a hands-on move. Eddie stood slowly, using the bench to steady himself. He kept his movements deliberate and his hands open. He did it because he could see where the encounter was headed and didn't want to give them any excuse to claim sudden movement. Hale continued pushing with questions that were not aimed at clarification. He demanded details as if Eddie needed to prove he belonged in public space. Eddie answered what he could and repeated that he was simply waiting for family. Dugan stepped forward and began watching Eddie's hands more closely, warning him to keep them where the officers could see them. Her tone didn't match the reality of what was happening. Eddie was not reaching, not fidgeting, and not making threats. Then Hale said the kind of line officers say when they stop pretending the stop is neutral. He framed Eddie's presence as inherently suspicious and treated the bench as if it wasn't a place Eddie should be hanging around. It wasn't an explanation of a crime. It was a statement about who they believed belonged there. Eddie remained composed, but the humiliation was obvious. He was being treated like a criminal in front of strangers while he stood outside a hospital doing nothing wrong. At that moment, two people walking through the lot noticed the scene and changed it. Nia Carter and Darius King were local Black Panther Party members who did community support work. They recognized the setup immediately. An older man boxed in, officers crowding his space, voices escalating, and no clear reason being stated. Nia raised her phone and began recording as they approached. Darius kept his pace calm and his hands visible while he positioned himself close enough to hear every word. They didn't rush in yelling. They came in with questions that forced clarity. What suspected offense existed, whether Eddie was being detained or free to leave, and what legal basis justified the officers' actions. The officers heard those questions, looked at the phones, and realized the stop had changed. Nia kept her phone up and steady, making sure it captured the officers' distance from Eddie, their hands, and the way they were surrounding him. Darius didn't get in anyone's face. He stood near Eddie's shoulder, close enough to hear clearly, far enough that nobody could honestly claim he was interfering. The questions stayed simple and legal. What suspected offense were the officers investigating? Was Eddie being detained or free to leave? And what specific facts supported the detention if they claimed one? Hale's posture tightened. He didn't like being questioned, but he liked being recorded even less. He tried to keep his tone authoritative, while switching to vague explanations. He said they were responding to a concern and needed to figure out what was going on. Darius immediately narrowed it down. If there was a concern, what exactly was it? If there was a call, what did it report? If there was a suspected crime, what was it called? If there wasn't a crime, then why were they ordering Eddie to stand, demanding ID, and boxing him in? Kessler stepped forward and attempted to control the new variables. He told Nia and Darius to back up and stop involving themselves. He spoke like their presence was the problem, not the fact that an older man was being treated like a suspect without cause. Nia didn't argue about emotions. She kept recording and stated clearly that she was documenting a public interaction and that Eddie had the right to be left alone unless the officers had lawful grounds to detain him. She also made sure Eddie stayed centered in frame so the video showed what mattered: his calm demeanor and the officer's escalating posture. Dugan took a different approach. She stepped in with a calmer voice, attempting to reframe the situation as routine safety. She suggested they were checking the area because the hospital had a lot of foot traffic, and they had to make sure people weren't causing issues. That still didn't answer the basic question. Eddie wasn't causing issues. He wasn't approaching anyone. He wasn't blocking doors. He wasn't raising his voice. He was standing there because they ordered him to stand. More bystanders stopped. A nurse near the doors lingered. A man in scrubs watched without moving. A couple waiting for their ride stood still, phones out. The scene had become visible, and the officers knew it. Hale tried to regain control by narrowing the encounter into compliance issues. He implied Eddie was being difficult. He suggested Eddie's questions were refusal. He treated calm requests for a reason, as if they were challenges to authority. Darius didn't let him. He pointed out that asking if someone is detained is not refusal. Asking what law applies is not aggression. He kept returning to the same point, because that's where these encounters either fall apart or turn into wrongful arrests. Officers need a legal reason, not just a preference. Eddie stayed calm. He didn't perform for the crowd. He didn't insult the officers. He simply repeated that he was waiting for family and asked why he was being treated like this. Hale then took a step closer, and Kessler positioned himself in a way that suggested the next move would be physical. One of them touched their gear near the cuffs again, not fully committing, but signaling that they wanted Eddie to feel the threat. That's when Nia shifted slightly, so her camera had a clean view of their hands, and Eddie's body language at the same time. She was anticipating the exact argument officers used later, that someone tensed, moved, or forced them to act. She was making it hard for them to rewrite the moment. Dugan attempted a new justification. She implied Eddie might be trespassing. Darius pressed for specifics immediately. Had hospital security trespassed him? Was there paperwork? Was there a verbal order on record? Had anyone told Eddie to leave? If none of that existed, then trespass was not a valid claim. The officers couldn't produce anything because there wasn't anything to produce. At this point, Hale made the mistake that would follow him later. He stopped talking about conduct and started talking about presence. He suggested that someone like Eddie sitting outside a hospital always ends up being a problem, and that they weren't going to wait for it to become one. That line landed with the crowd. It was clear what it meant. It wasn't about what Eddie did, it was about who Eddie was and what the officers assumed. A doctor, Lena Patel, stepped outside for a break and paused when she saw the scene. She looked from Eddie's face to the officer's posture to the phone's recording. She didn't say much at first, but her presence mattered because she was a professional witness with no personal connection to Eddie. Hale realized he was losing control of the narrative, so he tried to end the discussion the way officers sometimes do when they don't have lawful grounds but want to win anyway. He prepared to turn it into an arrest for something vague like disorderly conduct or failure to comply. He directed Eddie to turn around and place his hands behind his back. Eddie didn't panic. He didn't argue loudly. He looked to the side at Nia and Darius, then back at Hale, and asked one more time what he was being arrested for. Darius immediately asked the same question clearly, so it would be on the recording. What specific crime was the basis for the arrest? Nia stayed locked on the officer's hands and Eddie's posture. The crowd around them got quieter, not because it was calm, but because people could feel that the next 30 seconds were going to decide whether this ended as a bullying scare or a lawsuit. Hale told Eddie to turn around and put his hands behind his back. He said it like the decision was already made and the legal reason didn't matter. Kessler shifted closer, ready to assist. Dugan watched the crowd and the phones, and she looked like she was already calculating how to explain this later. Eddie didn't move suddenly. He didn't argue with insults. He stayed in place and asked what he was being arrested for. His voice was steady, but the question was direct. Darius repeated the question immediately, so it was captured clearly. What specific crime justified an arrest? Nia kept the camera tight on Haley and Kessler, then widened slightly to show Eddie's hands, his posture, and the distance between everyone. Hale did not give a clear charge. Instead, he tried to turn the moment into non-compliance. He claimed Eddie wasn't following instructions. The problem for Hale was that the camera showed Eddie had been following instructions the entire time. Eddie stood when he was ordered to stand. He kept his hands visible. He stayed calm. He asked questions, that was all. Kessler attempted to increase pressure by giving rapid commands, the kind that make it easier to claim someone failed to comply, even when they're trying. Darius pointed out that stacking commands doesn't create a lawful basis for detention. It just creates confusion officers can later blame on the person being targeted. The crowd had grown enough that the officers were no longer controlling what people believed. A few bystanders were filming from different angles. Dr. Patel remained near the entrance, watching closely. A hospital visitor asked what was happening. Another person said they had seen Eddie sitting there quietly for a while. Dugan tried to pull the situation back into something that sounded official. She said they had to confirm Eddie's identity because they were investigating a report. Darius asked what report and what description. She avoided specifics again. Then she tried trespass one more time, implying the hospital didn't want people lingering. That's when Dr. Patel spoke up, not to argue, but to clarify what she knew. She stated she had just come outside and saw an older man surrounded by officers, and that nothing about Eddie looked threatening. She also pointed out that people sat outside the entrance regularly, including patients and family, and that it was common. Hale didn't respond to her point. He focused on forcing the moment back into obedience. He took a half step toward Eddie as if to initiate handcuffing. Naya adjusted her position so the camera clearly showed Eddie's hands open at his sides and Hale stepping into Eddie's space. She said calmly and audibly that Eddie was not resisting and that the officers were escalating without stating a crime. That mattered because it removed the usual escape route. If an officer later claimed they had to use force because someone was resisting, the footage would show whether that was true. Hale hesitated. He looked past Eddie at the phones. He looked toward the entrance cameras. He looked at Dugan. You could see the calculation happening. If he put cuffs on Eddie without a stated basis, it would be on multiple recordings, with neutral witnesses, outside a hospital, with fixed security cameras. So he tried a different move. He demanded Eddie's ID again and framed it as a requirement. Eddie had already explained why he was there, and he had been willing to show ID, but he wanted the reason stated clearly. Darius told the officers that they were trying to use ID demand as a substitute for reasonable suspicion, and that was not how stops worked. Hale's frustration showed. He raised his voice slightly and said he didn't need to explain himself. The crowd reacted to that. More heads turned. The atmosphere changed from curiosity to concern. Then Dugan made the pivot that exposed the whole stop. She said in a controlled voice that Eddie matched someone they were looking for. Darius immediately asked for the description. Dugan gave something broad and generic. It was the kind of description that could apply to countless people and gets used when officers need a justification after the fact. Nia kept recording and asked why. If the description existed, the officers had approached Eddie aggressively from the start, instead of asking simple questions from a respectful distance. Hale realized he was boxed in. If he arrested Eddie, he would have to write a report that would be compared against multiple videos and witness statements. If he backed off, he would look like he had no reason to begin with. He chose to back off, but he tried to do it in a way that still felt like a win. He told Eddie he could go, but he framed it like it was a favor rather than a correction. He warned Eddie about coming back and implied future problems. Eddie didn't celebrate. He didn't insult them. He looked at them and stated calmly that sitting outside a hospital was not a crime and that they needed to stop treating people like suspects just because they were black. He kept it short and clear, and it landed because everyone watching had seen the entire setup. The officers stepped away and returned to their vehicles. They left without an arrest, without a citation, and without any clear statement of what they had been investigating. The crowd didn't cheer. People just kept filming until the units drove off, because they understood something important. The only reason Eddie wasn't leaving in handcuffs was because witnesses showed up and made it impossible to quietly rewrite the story. After the officers left, Nia and Darius stayed with Eddie for a moment. They asked if he was okay and if he wanted help reporting it. Dr. Patel offered to provide her information as a witness. A couple of bystanders did the same. Naya made sure everyone knew to save the original videos and not just post-clipped versions online. In the days that followed, the footage spread through the local community. It didn't go viral everywhere immediately, but it circulated where it mattered: local groups, hospital staff circles, and community oversight contacts. People recognized the pattern and started adding their own accounts of similar stops near the hospital entrance. That's how this moved from one ugly moment to a documented complaint with witnesses. Within 48 hours, Eddie's family and a small group of community advocates helped him file a formal complaint. It wasn't written like a rant. It was written like a timeline. Time, place, officer names from badges, what was said, what commands were given, and the key point that never changed. The officers escalated toward an arrest without stating a legitimate offense. Nia and Darius submitted their original recordings, not just the versions posted online. Two bystanders did the same. Dr. Patel provided a witness statement describing what she observed when she came outside and saw an older man surrounded and pressured. Hospital administration was also pulled in because the incident happened on their property under their security cameras during normal operating hours. Internal Affairs opened an investigation. The review didn't focus on whether Eddie cooperated enough. It focused on what the officers could articulate as lawful grounds from the first approach through the attempted arrest. Investigators reviewed the footage, the witness statements, and the officers' own reports. They also checked with hospital security and staff to confirm whether there had been a trespass order, a complaint from the hospital, or a request for police to remove Eddie. There wasn't. The officers tried to justify the stop using vague claims, a concern, a report, a description. The problem was that none of it matched their behavior on camera. They approached Eddie aggressively from the start. They crowded him. They escalated commands. They positioned for handcuffs. Then, only after recording began and witnesses pressed for legal grounds, they attempted to retrofit reasons that didn't hold up. Internal Affairs found multiple issues that could not be explained away as a misunderstanding. The findings concluded that the officers acted aggressively without sufficient basis, treated Eddie as suspicious without articulable facts, and moved toward detention and arrest without probable cause. The investigation also documented that their own shifting explanations were inconsistent with each other and inconsistent with the video timeline. That triggered the next stage. Eddie retained a civil rights attorney who treated the case like it should be treated, as an unlawful detention attempt driven by profiling, not a bad interaction. The claim focused on violations tied to unreasonable seizure and discriminatory enforcement. It also emphasized the harm that doesn't show up as bruises, public humiliation, fear, medical stress, and the message sent when an elderly man can't sit outside a hospital without being treated like a suspect. Once the city and department saw the volume of evidence, the strategy changed on their side too. They could fight it and risk depositions, body camera issues, policy questions, and a trial where the videos would be played repeatedly. Or they could settle. The case proceeded long enough to force real exposure. The officers were interviewed. Supervisors were questioned about training and discipline. The hospital's security camera angles were reviewed to corroborate crowding and positioning. The bystander videos made it impossible to lean on one narrow viewpoint. The lawsuit ended in a $1.9 million settlement. That number wasn't random. It reflected the seriousness of attempting to detain and arrest an elderly man without lawful cause, the strength of the recordings, and the department's risk if the case went to a jury. It also reflected the fact that this was not a single officer having a tone problem. Multiple officers participated, and the escalation was consistent. After the settlement, the department had to address the personnel side in a way that couldn't be handled quietly. The internal affairs findings and the legal outcome made it difficult to keep the officers in place without sending a message that the behavior was acceptable. The result was termination. The officers involved were fired after the investigation, and fallout ran its course. The public response wasn't just outrage, it was recognition. People understood why this ended differently than so many similar encounters. Eddie wasn't alone. Witnesses showed up. Multiple recordings existed. The questions were specific. The timeline was preserved. A doctor with no personal stake backed up what the cameras already showed. The officers couldn't isolate Eddie and couldn't control the story afterward. Northgate Medical Center also made changes because the incident happened at their front door. Hospital leadership coordinated with the department to tighten procedures for police contacts on hospital grounds. Security staff were instructed to handle non-emergency concerns directly instead of defaulting to police presence. The hospital also expanded camera coverage signage and clarified that benches near the entrance were public waiting areas, not loitering zones that could be selectively enforced. The police department announced new guidance as well, focused on lawful stop standards and documentation. The key change wasn't the language in a memo. It was the fact that supervisors now had a high-profile example of what happens when officers treat suspicion as a feeling instead of a standard. Eddie didn't become a public speaker. He didn't chase attention. He wanted peace. After the settlement, he focused on his health and his family. He also made one choice that mattered to him. He directed part of the money toward practical support in his community, helping fund local legal aid work so other people could get help before their situations became disasters. The lesson people took from it was simple and uncomfortable. The officers had felt comfortable escalating because they believed an elderly black man outside a hospital would be easy to control and easy to dismiss. The only reason it collapsed is because community members treated it like a rights issue immediately, not later. So here's the question for you. If you were walking into that hospital and saw an older man being crowded and ordered around without any clear reason, would you keep moving or would you stop and document? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you've seen something like this happen in your town, share what happened and how it ended. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories where the truth gets recorded and accountability actually follows.
I told you this is a criminal investigation.
We own this property. I gave you my ID. Check the job box. Our names are on it.
You don't tell me how to
He's
investigate.
telling you how to verify. That's different.
I'm talking to him. You can stay out of it.
No,
This
she
is her
stays in it. This is her
property, too.
property.
Turn around. Put your hands behind your back.
For what? For standing on.
A routine patrol decision turned into a civil rights problem when a Marion County deputy pulled onto a construction site and assumed the black homeowners on the lot didn't belong there. The deputy demanded identification, insisted the situation was a criminal investigation, and refused to verify ownership through the simplest on-site source available. Minutes later, one homeowner sat in handcuffs on land he legally owned, while the documentation that cleared him was sitting within reach. By the time the deputy admitted he had the wrong people, the humiliation was already done, and the department eventually ended his employment over how he handled it. Tell me where you're watching from, city and state. And if you watch these stories because you're tired of seeing power abused and excuses used as cover, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Now rewind. On June 29, 2025, Darius Vaughn and his wife, Amani Vaughn, drove out to Marion County to check on their newly built home. The build wasn't finished yet. Materials were still out. Construction was active, the kind of site where workers come and go, and where owners stop by all the time to look at progress. They parked near the lot and sat down to eat lunch on the property, nothing sneaky, no rushing around, no hiding. Just two people taking a break on land they owned. A patrol deputy, Travis Holloway, noticed a running vehicle in front of a new construction site and decided to pull in. He later leaned on theft concerns in the area as the reason he approached, and checking a site isn't the issue. The issue is how quickly he jumped to suspicion and how hard he clung to it once the homeowners told him the truth. Instead of starting with basic verification, the deputy treated the couple like they were already in the wrong. He demanded identification and framed the whole interaction like a criminal investigation. Darius and Imani told him they owned the property. That should have triggered the simplest next step: confirm ownership. On sites like this, the owner information is often posted right there because builders, inspectors, and subcontractors need it. In this case, the job box on the lot listed the owners. The deputy didn't check it. He didn't walk over, read the names, and clear the situation in seconds. Darius did what most people do when they realize an officer isn't listening. He stayed controlled and tried to keep the conversation anchored in facts. He provided his identification. He repeated the ownership point. He pushed back on the idea that he needed to prove he belonged on his own land. One important detail sat underneath the whole exchange. Darius wasn't only a homeowner, he was a veteran federal DEA agent. The deputy didn't know that at first, but that didn't excuse what happened, because rights aren't supposed to depend on job titles. Still, it mattered because Darius understood procedure better than most civilians ever will. He knew what a legitimate investigation looks like. He also knew what it looks like when an officer escalates, because they don't like being challenged. Imani stood right there watching the tone sharpen. She kept insisting they owned the property and called out what it looked like from her side. Profiling first, questions second. She wasn't just defending a point. She was defending the basic dignity of being treated like a lawful person instead of a problem to be controlled. The deputy didn't pivot. He didn't verify. He kept pressing. That's where the story stops being about a suspicious vehicle and starts being about a decision-making failure. Verification was available. The deputy chose pressure. Once the deputy framed it as a criminal investigation, he stopped acting like he was trying to figure out what was true. He started acting like he needed someone to submit. Darius had already handed over identification. That should have been the off-ramp. A deputy who genuinely suspected trespassing could have done 3 quick things: glance at the job box, compare names, and walk away. Even if he didn't trust the job box, he could have called the builder, checked the permit paperwork tied to the address, or run the ID through dispatch and asked one direct question about property records. Basic steps. Fast steps. Deputy Holloway didn't take any of them. He kept the couple in place and kept pressing the same angle, as if repeating authority would replace evidence. He talked like the couple's explanations were excuses that needed to be tested, not information that needed to be verified. Darius and Imani kept telling him the same fact in different ways. They owned the land, they were allowed to be there, and nothing about eating lunch on your own property was a crime. The deputy's tone stayed aggressive. His posture stayed forward. He treated their calm pushback like resistance. That's a common pivot in these encounters. An officer demands compliance. A person answers with facts. The officer hears it as defiance. Then the officer starts using the word investigation like it's a free pass to do anything next. Darius didn't get loud. He didn't lunge into ego. He stayed precise because he understood something important. The more controlled he stayed, the harder it would be to justify escalation later. He also made it clear that the deputy was making a serious error and that there would be consequences if he continued down this path. Not a threat, a warning about accountability. Imani didn't let the moment get reframed as 2 people being difficult. She stayed focused on the core issue. The deputy came in assuming they didn't belong, and he refused to check the obvious proof that they did. She called out profiling directly. She said it plainly, because that's what it looked like. At that point, the deputy had 2 choices. He could verify and leave, or he could keep leaning on power to avoid admitting he was wrong. He chose the second one. He kept insisting he wasn't leaving. He kept pushing for more compliance. He treated Darius's ID like it was just another item in a checklist, not the key that should have resolved the suspicion. Every minute that passed made the deputy's decision look worse, because the longer he stayed, the more it stopped being a check and started looking like a personal contest. Then the rain made it uglier. Bad weather doesn't create misconduct, but it exposes it. When someone keeps you outside in the rain, while they hold the authority to end the encounter, it sends a message. It's discomfort used as leverage. It's a way to remind you who controls the situation. Darius and Imani held their ground anyway. They kept repeating the same truth because they shouldn't have to invent new arguments to be treated like lawful homeowners. Darius had already given his name. His wife had already confirmed the ownership. The property was theirs whether the deputy liked it or not. The deputy still didn't verify. And with the rain coming down and the deputy committed to the criminal investigation story, the situation moved toward the moment that changed everything: detention. The deputy reached the point where he couldn't keep the same posture without escalating. He'd already committed to the idea that this was a criminal situation. He'd already treated their explanations like excuses. Backing off without winning would have meant admitting he had built the whole encounter on an assumption. So he tightened his grip on the moment. He detained Darius in the rain. Handcuffs went on. while Darius stood on his own property, with his wife watching it happen in real time. No theft was observed, no burglary tools, no attempt to flee, no evidence that the couple was lying, because the deputies still hadn't bothered to check the easiest proof source on the lot. That's what made it so hard to defend afterward. Detention isn't supposed to be a punishment for not sounding convincing. It's supposed to follow facts. Imani didn't stand there quietly while her husband got treated like a criminal. She protested immediately and kept the point sharp. They owned the land. They had said it repeatedly, and the deputy was acting on a bias-driven assumption instead of verification. She called it profiling to his face and made it clear she understood what she was seeing. Darius didn't melt down. He didn't beg. He didn't try to talk his way into being treated like a person. He stayed controlled and kept the focus on the core failure. The deputy had options to verify ownership and refused to use them. He told the deputy again that this was a serious mistake with consequences attached. That warning landed the way it usually lands in these situations. It didn't calm the deputy down. It irritated him. Some officers hear, "You're violating my rights," and treat it like an insult. They take it personally. They stop thinking about whether they're correct and start thinking about whether they're being challenged. The deputy doubled down. He kept talking like the handcuffs were justified because he had concerns and because he was investigating. He treated the couple's confidence as suspicious, like lawful owners aren't allowed to sound certain when they're standing on their own land. He stretched the situation to fit the decision he already made. Rain kept coming down while this happened. Darius stood cuffed and wet while the deputy remained in control, not because the facts required it, but because the deputy refused to pause and verify. That's the moment where the whole power game flipped. Because once you put someone in cuffs, you better be able to explain why, clearly and fast. You better have something stronger than a vibe and a running vehicle. The deputy finally did what he should have done at the start. He checked the construction job box. It listed the owners. Both names were there, Darius Vaughn and Imani Vaughn. The deputy didn't find evidence of theft. He found proof of ownership that had been sitting on the lot the entire time. At that point, the deputy's whole stance collapsed. He had no reason to keep Darius detained. He had no lawful foundation left to stand on. He'd turned a quick verification into an unnecessary detention, and now the proof was in black and white. He removed the handcuffs and released Darius. Then he tried to explain it away with the same line about theft concerns in the area, like that erased the choices he made on the lot. The couple didn't accept that. They made the real issue clear. He didn't verify first. He escalated fast, and he treated them like criminals on their own property. An apology came after the damage, which is how it usually goes. The humiliation had already happened. The detention had already happened. The rain had already soaked through everything. You don't undo that with a few words after you finally read the job box. Darius and Imani left that lot with the truth confirmed, but also with something else. Proof that the system can flip on you, even when you're doing nothing wrong, even when you're the homeowner, even when the evidence is sitting right there. What happened on that lot didn't end when the cuffs came off. It couldn't. Not with a detention that never should have happened. Not with the proof sitting on site the whole time, and not with the deputy admitting he had nothing, only after he finally checked the job box. Darius and Imani treated it like what it was, an abuse of authority built on an assumption. They pushed for review. They made sure the incident didn't get filed away as a field interview or a misunderstanding. If oversight systems exist at all, this is the kind of situation they're supposed to catch. The department reviewed what the deputy did, and it wasn't hard to see the problem. The timeline mattered. He arrived, treated the couple like suspects immediately, demanded ID, refused to verify ownership when it was easy to do, escalated the tone, then detained Darius in the rain. Only after that did he check the job box and confirmed the Vaughns were listed as the owners. That order of operations is the whole story. If the deputy had verified first, nothing else happens. No cuffs, no rain-soaked detention, no humiliation on private property. The review likely focused on that decision point, because it's where the deputy's discretion stopped looking like caution and started looking like control. His after-the-fact explanation about theft concerns didn't fix it. Departments hear that excuse all the time. Concerns in the area can justify checking a scene. It doesn't justify skipping basic verification and escalating anyway. The deputy didn't just approach, he chose to press. He chose to treat the homeowner's ownership claim as something to challenge instead of something to confirm. That's also why the couple's profiling complaint landed. Their position wasn't complicated. Two black homeowners said they owned the land. The deputy acted like that couldn't be true until he forced them through a confrontation. When he finally checked the site information, it was true the entire time. The fallout came down to accountability. After the incident was reviewed, Deputy Travis Holloway was fired from the Marion County Sheriff's Department. That ending didn't happen because he checked the lot. It happened because he delayed the check until after he used restraints. He escalated before he verified. He created the very problem he later tried to explain. For Darius and Imani, the firing didn't erase what happened. It didn't give them back the normal feeling they should have had on their own land. New builds already come with stress, money, timing, inspections, delays. They went out there to look at progress and eat lunch, and instead they got treated like they were trespassing on their own future. That kind of moment sticks. They also walked away with something that matters in situations like this. A clear example of why documentation and follow-through are the difference between nothing changes and someone is held responsible. Darius didn't need to scream. Imani didn't need to back down. They kept it factual, kept it consistent, and didn't let the department pretend it was normal. The bigger lesson wasn't only about one deputy, it was about a pattern that shows up everywhere. Too many encounters start with assumption. Then the officer looks for facts that support it. That's backward. When law enforcement does it that way, regular people pay for it with fear, humiliation, and sometimes worse. If you're watching this and thinking, I would have handled it differently, ask yourself what you would have done while standing in the rain on your own property with someone insisting you're the problem. Would you comply and hope they calm down? Would you record and keep repeating the facts? Would you push the complaint afterward, even if people told you it wasn't worth it? Because that's the real divider. The moment is one thing. What you do after is what decides whether it becomes a pattern or a consequence. Drop your thoughts in the comments and tell me how you would have handled it. And if you want more stories where the power play doesn't get the last word, like subscribe and stay with the channel.
We're here to check on your girlfriend and that kid. Stop making this difficult.
That's my wife. Watch how you talk to her.
Then have your wife answer the questions.
You don't get to come onto my porch and call me that.
I'm not doing this back and forth with you. We're trying to check on a child.
You came to my house, disrespected my wife, and now you're looking at my windows without explaining anything.
This officer walked up thinking he was about to control a simple welfare check at a random house. But he had no idea he'd just stepped onto the wrong porch with the wrong attitude. The homeowner wasn't scared, wasn't confused, and wasn't about to get talked down to in front of his wife. What started as a routine knock turned into a recorded accountability moment the department couldn't ignore once it hit the internet. Now, before we rewind, tell me where you're watching from. Country, state, city, whatever. And if you watch stories where disrespect gets exposed and accountability actually lands, hit like and subscribe. All right, here's what was happening in real time. In May 2020, two officers, Rachel Bennett and Tyler Brooks, arrived at the California home of Sergeant Daniel Ellison, an Army veteran who was home with his wife, Lena. The call was supposed to be a welfare check connected to a hospital report that a child might have ingested nail polish remover. Serious on paper, urgent enough to move fast. The catch was simple and huge. They were at the wrong address. Daniel didn't know that. He didn't get the context. He just saw police on his property at his door, acting like he owed them answers, while they refused to start with a clear reason. Brooks led the contact, and he led it badly. Instead of introducing himself properly and explaining what they were doing there, he went straight into that impatient, commanding tone that assumes the person on the other side of the door is already guilty of something. Then he started referring to Lena with disrespectful labels, calling her Daniel's girlfriend and baby mama, instead of acknowledging she was his wife, and this was her home too. That wasn't a small detail. It set the whole interaction on fire. Daniel corrected him. Not with theatrics, with a firm boundary. Brooks took the correction personally and raised his voice. The more Daniel pushed for clarity, the more Brooks treated it like defiance. Bennett stayed present but quiet at first. She watched Daniel, she watched Brooks. She looked like someone trying to figure out whether this was about to turn into a problem she'd have to clean up. Daniel kept demanding the basics. Who called, what was reported, why they were there, and what authority they thought they had to start probing around his home. He also made it clear he felt they were violating his rights, especially when the officer's behavior shifted from knocking to investigating without explanation. Then one of them looked through a window. Daniel's tone changed immediately. His anger jumped, because from his point of view, they still hadn't justified anything, and now they were peering into his house like it was open for inspection. He accused them of crossing a line. Brooks didn't de-escalate. He escalated again, louder, more aggressive, and eventually vulgar. That's the power chess game right there. Daniel asked for clarity and respect. Brooks tried to win with pressure, volume, dismissive language, and provocation. The goal in moments like that is simple. Make the homeowner react emotionally so the officer can claim control. Daniel didn't give him that clean win. He stayed planted. He stayed verbal. He didn't rush at them. He didn't threaten them. He held his boundary and kept calling out what he saw. Bennett finally stepped in with a different approach. She slowed it down, started asking the questions Brooks should have asked first, and moved toward actually figuring out whether the call details matched this home at all. That shift is where everything starts to crack, because once Bennett focused on the facts instead of ego, the truth came out fast. And that's where part 2 begins. Bennett explains the real reason for the visit, the wrong address becomes undeniable, and Brooks has to deal with what he created on camera. Bennett finally cut into the chaos the only way that works in moments like this. She stopped feeding the argument and started running the call like a call. She asked for the details tied to the welfare check. She checked what was actually reported. She compared it to what she was seeing in front of her. Daniel kept talking, still angry, still firm. But now his energy had somewhere to land, because somebody on that porch was finally acting like a professional. Brooks didn't like losing control of the interaction. He kept trying to steer it back into a dominance contest. His tone stayed sharp. He acted like Daniel's questions were the issue, not his own behavior. He kept talking like the goal was to win the porch, not resolve the situation. Bennett didn't match that energy. She asked Daniel for basic info in a way that sounded like she actually wanted to verify, not accuse. She also started explaining piece by piece what they were responding to. A hospital had contacted police because there was concern a child may have swallowed nail polish remover. The call came in as urgent enough to justify a quick welfare check. Daniel's face didn't soften, but his frustration shifted. He wasn't arguing against a welfare check. He was arguing against how they showed up and how Brooks spoke to his wife and to him. He made that clear. He pointed out the labels Brooks used for Lena. He pointed out the raised voice. He pointed out the window look, while they still hadn't explained anything. And that window part mattered, because it's the kind of move that instantly makes people feel like the situation is turning into a search, not a check. From a legal angle, Bennett had cover. Officers can approach a home and knock. That's normal, and if they're responding to a possible medical emergency involving a child, a quick look through a window can get framed as checking for signs of distress. Courts often give leeway when officers reasonably think someone inside might need immediate help. But none of that made Brooks's conduct look any better on camera. Bennett kept working through the facts until the mismatch became obvious. The call wasn't matching this household. The address was wrong. The supposed child in danger wasn't here. Daniel wasn't relieved. He was vindicated. Because once the wrong address reality landed, it exposed the whole thing. Brooks hadn't been firm during an emergency. He'd been disrespectful at the wrong house to the wrong people, while refusing to explain why he was there. That's not command presence. That's ego with a badge. Bennett acknowledged the mistake and started pulling the interaction back toward closure. She clarified they weren't accusing Daniel or Lena of anything. She framed it as a misdirected welfare check. She tried to end it cleanly. Brooks still couldn't resist one last push. His tone carried that defensive edge officers get when they realize they've been recorded acting out and they can't undo it. He didn't apologize in a meaningful way. He didn't take responsibility. He just tried to exit without looking like he lost. Daniel didn't let him leave with the narrative. He stayed composed enough to deliver the point clearly. They came to the wrong home, disrespected his family, escalated for no reason, and then tried to justify it after the fact. He didn't need theatrics. The footage handled the rest. Bennett and Brooks left. The porch got quiet again, but the situation didn't end there. Daniel had a recording of officers showing up hostile, misidentifying his wife, raising their voices, peeking through a window, and only later admitting they were wrong. And Daniel did what more people started doing in 2020 when they felt boxed in by authority. He posted it. Once Daniel posted the footage, it stopped being a neighborhood moment and turned into a public one. People shared it for one reason. The escalation didn't match the call. Viewers could follow the pattern even without being told what to think. 2 officers showed up for a welfare check, didn't clearly explain themselves up front, and one of them talked to the homeowner like the homeowner was the problem for asking basic questions. Add the disrespect towards Lena and the window look, and it looked even worse. The comments split into the same lanes you always see, but the video kept winning because it was specific. Not rumors, not he said, she said. It showed the tone, the pacing, the choices. It showed Brooks turning a simple contact into a confrontation. And it showed Bennett trying, late but trying, to put the interaction back on rails. That difference mattered online. People didn't treat the officers as a single unit. They started comparing them. Brooks became the symbol of the problem. Not because he knocked on a door, but because he stacked mistake on top of mistake. He assumed authority meant he didn't need to explain. He used disrespectful labels for the homeowner's wife. He escalated when corrected. He got louder when challenged. He used vulgar language instead of professionalism. He kept pushing even after it became obvious the call details weren't lining up. Bennett didn't get a free pass, but she got a very different read. Viewers saw her shift into de-escalation mode. They saw her focus on the actual welfare check details. They saw her deliver the explanation that should have been delivered at the start. In a video where one officer kept trying to dominate, the other one looked like the person trying to end the situation without making it worse. That's how it spread. Not just outrage, but contrast. Then the department had to respond. At first, departments usually tried to sit on stuff like this. Quiet review, no comment. Hope the clip dies in the feed. This one didn't die. The backlash grew fast enough that silence started looking like agreement. So the department went public with an apology. Not a vague, "we regret the misunderstanding" type of statement. A real acknowledgement that the contact was handled poorly. They addressed the professionalism issue because the wrong address piece was bad, but the behavior on camera was the part people couldn't unsee. Behind the scenes, pressure hit from multiple directions at once. Community members called, people emailed, local media sniffed around. The footage became the kind of clip supervisors hate because it's simple to understand. No technical argument saves you when the attitude is the headline. Brooks felt that heat immediately. You could almost predict the internal conversations. Supervisors asking why he didn't explain the call sooner, why he talked to the residents that way, why he used vulgar language, why he escalated instead of controlling the tone, why he made the department look reckless over a welfare check at the wrong house. And Brooks didn't have a good answer that matched the video. That's the thing about recordings. They don't care about your "I felt threatened" vibe if your behavior shows you were trying to provoke the reaction. Bennett, on the other hand, looked like the person who tried to salvage it. That didn't mean she was perfect, but it gave the department something to point to. One officer attempted to de-escalate and clarify the purpose of the call. Daniel and Lena watched all of this play out from their side of the screen, and that comes with its own stress. Posting a video like that invites attention, support, yes. Also strangers in your business. Also people trying to nitpick your tone. Also the risk of retaliation if the department is the type to take things personally. But Daniel had the advantage of being steady and documented. The clip wasn't edited into something misleading. It showed the sequence clearly: confusion, disrespect, escalation, clarification, wrong address. As the story kept circulating, the department's options shrank. They could either discipline Brooks and admit the obvious, or keep him and signal to everyone that this is acceptable behavior during welfare checks. Public pressure makes those choices real. By the time the dust started settling, the department moved Brooks out. In cases like this, it often happens as a resignation allowed by leadership or a separation that avoids a long public fight. However it got framed internally, the outcome looked the same from the outside. Brooks didn't remain in that role after the backlash. Bennett didn't get that outcome. She stayed, and the public narrative around her was noticeably more favorable because she had tried to calm the situation and explain what was actually happening. Once the department apologized publicly, people tried to treat that as the ending. Daniel didn't. Lena didn't. An apology doesn't rewind the disrespect, and it doesn't erase the fact that two officers showed up to the wrong home and still managed to turn it into a confrontation. The bigger consequence wasn't just Brooks leaving. It was the lesson everyone could see without needing a legal degree. When officers skip the basic step of explaining themselves, they create the very danger they claim to be preventing. Daniel's footage became the reference point in local conversations for weeks. Not because it was flashy, but because it was clean evidence of a common pattern. A resident asked reasonable questions. An officer took it personally. The officer escalated. The second officer eventually did the job correctly, and the truth came out. The department's internal response mattered too, even if they didn't say every detail out loud. Brooks didn't stay on the department after the backlash. Whether they framed it as a resignation, a separation, or a mutual decision, the public saw the same outcome. He was gone. That happened because the video made it hard to defend him without defending the behavior. Departments can argue law. They struggle arguing tone when it's recorded. Bennett came out of it looking better, and that wasn't about people loving police. It was about people recognizing one officer tried to fix what the other one broke. She stepped in, clarified the call, and de-escalated instead of trying to dominate. She didn't prevent the bad start, but she stopped it from going further. Daniel and Lena didn't get something dramatic, like a trophy or a parade. Real life doesn't work like that. What they got was confirmation that recording mattered, and that standing firm without getting reckless can change outcomes. They also got something less visible, a shift in how they handled their own safety. After that day, they treated every unexpected knock differently. Phones charged, cameras ready, clear rolls. Lena watching details while Daniel handled the front. Not because they wanted conflict, but because they understood how fast a wrong assumption can become a problem when someone in uniform decides they're the main character. On the department side, the incident became a training example, whether they admitted it publicly or not. Welfare checks don't just require urgency. They require communication. The simplest way to keep control of a scene is to explain why you're there and what you need. When officers open with disrespect and vagueness, residents fill the gap with suspicion, and the interaction turns into a contest. That's what happened here. A welfare check about a child possibly ingesting nail polish remover should have taken minutes. Knock, explain, verify the address, move on. Instead, Brooks made it personal. He disrespected Lena. He raised his voice. He used vulgar language. He tried to pressure Daniel into either submitting or snapping. Bennett had to step in and do damage control. The call ended with the truth that should have been established first. Wrong address. So here's the takeaway, and it's not complicated. Professionalism isn't a bonus, it's the job. If an officer can't show basic respect during a routine contact, that officer becomes the risk factor. Now I want to hear from you. If police showed up at your house and wouldn't explain why they were there, what would you do? Would you step outside, keep the door closed, start recording, ask for a supervisor? Drop it in the comments. And if you want more story times like this, realistic situations, clear accountability, and people refusing to be bullied, make sure you subscribe and keep notifications on, because the next one is just as wild.
I need to come in and take a quick look around. Step back.
Do you have a warrant?
I'm conducting an investigation. I have reasonable
Investigation.
suspicion.
Reasonable suspicion is not a key to my house. Do you have a warrant, consent, or an emergency?
Innocent people cooperate. You refusing makes you look suspicious.
Refusal is not suspicion. It's a right. Are you asking for consent or giving a lawful order? State the legal
I'm not
basis.
playing word games.
Police overreach keeps happening because some officers think pressure can replace the law. That's what Officer Brett Tanner tried at a private home one evening. He showed up, demanded entry, and acted like the resident had no real choice. He was wrong. The man at the door knew the law, stayed calm, and forced Tanner into a mistake that would later blow up his career. Tanner still had no idea the resident was Privacy Commissioner Elias Rowan. Comment where you're watching from. And if you follow stories about civil rights, police abuse, and real accountability, like the video and subscribe. Tanner was sent to the house on a suspicious activity call. The report was weak. No violence, no emergency, no crime clearly in progress. Elias Rowan opened the door. Tanner immediately said he needed to come inside and look around. Rowan asked if he had a warrant. Tanner said he was conducting an investigation. That was the first red flag. He didn't answer the question because the answer was no. He had no warrant. He just expected the badge and tone to carry him through the door. Rowan asked again, did Tanner have a signed warrant authorizing entry into the house? Tanner changed the wording and said he had reasonable suspicion. That was false. Reasonable suspicion does not allow an officer to enter a private residence. It doesn't replace a warrant. Tanner was either bluffing or didn't know the limit of his own authority. Rowan didn't reveal who he was. He let Tanner keep talking. He asked whether there was an emergency inside the home. Tanner gave no clear answer. Rowan asked whether anyone inside was in immediate danger. No answer. He asked whether Tanner had seen a crime from outside the property. Again, nothing solid. That exposed the whole move. Tanner wanted entry first and justification later. Then came the usual pressure. He said innocent people cooperate. He implied refusal made Rowan look suspicious. He said he only needed a quick look. Rowan answered with the law. He said entry into a private residence requires a warrant, consent, or an actual emergency. None of those existed. Tanner kept pushing. He brought up officer safety and said he needed to secure the scene. Same tactic, different wording. Rowan asked a direct question. Was Tanner giving a lawful order based on specific legal authority? Or was he asking for consent to enter? Tanner couldn't answer it cleanly. If it was consent, Rowan could refuse. If it was a lawful order, Tanner had to name the legal basis. He did neither. He just repeated that he needed to get inside and said Rowan was making things harder. That's what officers do when they don't have legal footing. They try to make the person asserting rights sound like the problem. The scene itself made Tanner look worse. Quiet residential street, no signs of distress, no emergency, no reason for forced entry. The front of the house was covered by security cameras, and Tanner's body camera was running. A neighbor had started watching. A delivery driver slowed down near the curb. Tanner still kept pressing. Rowan asked for his badge number. Tanner gave it. Then Rowan asked him to state on camera what legal standard allowed entry into a private home without a warrant. Tanner said reasonable suspicion again. That was a serious mistake. Now the false claim was on video. Rowan said there would be no consent to enter and no consent to search. Tanner reacted by putting his hand on the door and pushing it wider. Then he moved a foot toward the threshold, as if he were about to step in. That changed the case. This was no longer just verbal pressure. It was an attempted unlawful entry. Rowan stopped him immediately. He told Tanner to remove his hand from the door and keep his foot outside. He stated clearly that no consent had been given and that any attempt to enter would be unlawful. Tanner hesitated. He tried to go back to the vague complaint. Suspicious activity, need to verify, neighborhood concern. None of it answered the basic question. Rowan asked him one last time what emergency justified entry into the house. Tanner had no answer. That was when the power shifted. Tanner still had the uniform, but the bluff was finished. He had made false legal claims on camera and tried to push into a private home without a warrant. Rowan let him finish talking. Then he decided Tanner needed to know exactly whose door he was standing at. Rowan told Tanner he was going to make this very simple for him. He said the officer was standing at the home of Elias Rowan, the current privacy commissioner, and that every second of this contact was being recorded for formal review. He also said Tanner had just tried to enter a private residence without a warrant, without consent, and without any emergency that could justify it. That landed immediately. Tanner's whole posture changed. Not because he suddenly respected the law, because he understood the risk. A minute earlier, he was still trying to dominate the scene. Now he was trying to figure out how much damage he had already done. He asked Rowan to repeat his name. Rowan did. Then he identified his office in full. That was the break in the scene. Tanner stopped talking over him. He stopped pushing the doorway. He pulled his hand back. He stepped off the threshold. Too late to undo anything, but early enough to show he finally understood this wasn't an ordinary resident. Rowan didn't let him regain control of the exchange. He laid it out in order. Tanner had demanded entry without a warrant. He had used reasonable suspicion as if it authorized a residential search. It did not. He had tried to pressure consent by implying refusal created suspicion. He had then placed a hand on the door and moved into the entry line without lawful authority. Every part of that sequence was now preserved on camera. Tanner tried to shrink the incident. He said there had been a misunderstanding. He said he was only trying to verify a complaint. He said he had not entered the home. That was weak, and Rowan treated it that way. He said attempted unlawful entry did not become lawful because the resident stopped it in time. He said coercion did not become consent because the officer failed to complete the search. He said the issue was not whether Tanner had managed to get fully inside. The issue was that he had no lawful basis to try. That's the part bad officers hate. Precision, no yelling, no chaos. Just a clean record and a person who knows exactly how to describe the misconduct. Tanner then tried the fallback move. He asked if they could reset the conversation and handle the matter informally. Rowan refused that immediately. He said the matter had already moved past informal handling the moment Tanner asserted false authority and attempted to cross the threshold. Then he asked whether Tanner intended to call a supervisor himself or whether Rowan should request one through dispatch while the recording continued. Tanner paused again. He knew what either option meant. A supervisor arriving on scene would hear the legal issue while the body camera was still running. Dispatch records would pin the timeline down even further. There was no clean exit left. He called for a supervisor. That was the first correct decision he made at the house. While they waited, Rowan kept him pinned to facts. He asked whether dispatch had sent him on a report of violence. No. He asked whether dispatch had reported any imminent threat inside the home. No. He asked whether Tanner had observed anything from outside the property that could support immediate entry. No clear answer. Rowan asked him one more time to state whether he had relied on reasonable suspicion as grounds to enter the home. Tanner didn't want to repeat it now. He said he had been assessing the situation. That answer only made him look worse. A few minutes later, Sergeant Nina Holloway arrived. She stepped out of her car expecting a routine friction call between an officer and a resident. She walked into something much more serious. Tanner started trying to explain first. That was another mistake. Officers who know they're in trouble usually rush to frame the story before anyone else speaks. Holloway listened for a few seconds. Rowan cut in and identified himself. That changed her face immediately. She didn't become deferential. She became careful. Big difference. She understood at once that this was now a legal exposure issue for the department, not just a field supervision issue. She asked Rowan to explain what had happened from the beginning. He gave her the short version. Tanner demanded entry without a warrant. He claimed reasonable suspicion authorized it. He used pressure to force consent. He put his hand on the door and moved towards the threshold. The property cameras captured it. Tanner's body camera captured it. A neighbor and a driver had also witnessed part of the exchange. Holloway turned to Tanner and asked one direct question. Did he tell the resident that reasonable suspicion allowed him to enter the home? Tanner tried to soften it. He said he may have referred to investigative authority in the course of the contact. That answer did not help him. Holloway asked again, more directly this time. Did he or did he not say, reasonable suspicion justified entry? Tanner admitted he had said it. That was the point where the scene stopped being about judgment and became about evidence. Rowan then explained the problem in terms Holloway could not ignore. A home gets the highest level of protection. Entry requires a warrant, consent, or a recognized emergency exception. None existed here. Tanner had no warrant. He had no victim inside, no sounds of distress, no active pursuit, no visible crime, and no lawful basis to force access. He had relied on a false legal standard, then tried to convert pressure into compliance. That was not confusion. That was overreach. Holloway knew he was right. She also knew this had likely just become an internal affairs case before the officer even left the property. Tanner made one more bad move. He tried to suggest Rowan's refusal to cooperate had escalated the contact. Rowan shut that down fast. He said a citizen's refusal to waive constitutional protection is not escalation. It is the exercise of a right. The officer's decision to ignore that right was the escalation. That answer ended the argument right there. Holloway told Tanner to stop speaking. Then she apologized to Rowan, but Rowan didn't let the conversation drift into polite damage control. He said he was not interested in a porch apology. He wanted the names of every officer assigned to the call, confirmation that body camera footage would be preserved, confirmation that dispatch audio would be retained, and confirmation that the matter would be referred for formal review before the end of shift. That's how someone with actual institutional knowledge handles misconduct. No speeches, no emotional back and forth. Lock the record, preserve the evidence, remove room for editing later. Holloway agreed. She gave her name and badge number. She said the footage would be flagged and preserved. She also said the call log and dispatch notes would be attached to the report. Rowan then made it worse for Tanner because he was still not done. He informed Holloway that Tanner's conduct raised not only constitutional issues, but also privacy governance concerns. An officer who casually claims authority to enter a private residence without legal basis is not just making a bad arrest decision. He is showing disregard for the boundary the law protects most. That becomes a training issue, a supervision issue, and a public trust issue all at once. That was the moment Tanner understood this was not heading toward a warning memo or a quiet correction. This would move. Fast. He tried one last time to speak directly to Rowan. He said he had no intention of violating anyone's rights. Rowan answered that intention was not the standard. Conduct was. That line finished him. Holloway directed Tanner back toward the sidewalk and away from the door. She then asked Rowan whether he intended to file a formal complaint. He said yes, and he said it would include unlawful attempted entry, coercive consent tactics, false statements of legal authority, and failure to articulate any emergency basis for bypassing the warrant requirement. Holloway didn't argue. She couldn't. Before ending the contact, Rowan gave one final statement for the record. He said rights do not depend on whether an officer feels inconvenienced by them. That was the entire case in one sentence. Tanner had shown up expecting an easy display of authority. He left the porch under supervision on camera after being corrected on the law at the home of the privacy commissioner himself. And the real damage was only starting. Rowan filed the complaint that same night. He didn't leave room for interpretation. He listed the sequence in order, attached the timestamps from the exterior security system, identified the attempted threshold entry, and described the exact legal claim Tanner had made on camera. He also requested preservation of all related material: body camera footage, dispatch audio, patrol car video, call notes, and supervisor communications. That mattered. Fast complaints with specific evidence are hard to bury. By the next morning, the case had already moved beyond a normal citizen complaint. Tanner had not just handled a call badly. He had asserted authority he did not have, used the wrong legal standard to demand access to a home, and done it in front of a resident whose job was built around privacy law and institutional compliance. Internal Affairs opened a review almost immediately. The first problem for Tanner was the video. His body camera matched Rowan's exterior footage. The sequence was clean. Tanner demanded entry. Rowan asked for a warrant. Tanner avoided the answer. Tanner relied on reasonable suspicion. Rowan asked whether there was an emergency. Tanner could not name one. Then came the pressure tactics. Refusal means suspicion. Quick look. Don't make this harder. Then the door. Hand on it. Push. Foot toward the threshold. There was no mystery in the footage. That's what made it bad. The second problem was dispatch. The original call did not support what Tanner tried to do at the house. It was a weak suspicious activity report with no violence, no emergency, and no instructions suggesting immediate danger inside the property. That destroyed any later attempt to claim he had responded to a crisis. Then, the witness statements came in. The neighbor across the street said she heard Tanner raising his voice and talking like he had the right to go inside. The delivery driver confirmed he saw the officer pressing the interaction and standing too close to the doorway. Neither witness could describe every legal detail, but they didn't need to. They supported the central point. Tanner was the one escalating the scene. Sergeant Nina Holloway's report didn't save him either. She documented that when she arrived, Rowan identified the false legal standard immediately, described the attempted entry clearly, and requested preservation of evidence on the spot. She also documented that Tanner admitted he had referred to reasonable suspicion as grounds for entry. Once that went into a supervisory report, his options got even smaller. Then Internal Affairs checked Tanner's history. That's where the case got worse. There had been prior complaints, not identical, but close enough to show a pattern. 2 earlier contacts had involved allegations that Tanner pressured residents during consent searches. One complaint said he implied refusal would create legal trouble. Another said he treated basic questions about warrants as non-cooperation. Those cases had not ended his career, but they now looked very different when placed next to the Rowan footage. That's how career-ending files get built. Not from one bad clip alone. From one bad clip that suddenly makes the old complaints make sense. The department's legal office got involved before the first week was over. They understood the exposure. If Rowan wanted to litigate, the city was in a weak position. The facts were terrible. The recording was clear. The officer had used the wrong legal theory on camera. And the target of the misconduct was a national privacy official with the knowledge and credibility to explain every violation in public if necessary. That changed the department's tone fast. Tanner was pulled from patrol pending investigation. His access to independent fieldwork was suspended. He was ordered to submit a supplemental report explaining the legal basis for his attempted entry. That report hurt him even more. He tried to clean up the language. He stopped saying reasonable suspicion authorized entry and started using vague phrases about evolving safety assessment and investigative necessity. That might have worked in a case without footage. Here, it only made him look dishonest. Internal reviewers could compare the report to the video and see the gap immediately. That's a bad place for any officer. The original conduct is one problem. A paper trail that looks cleaned up after the fact is another. Rowan did not let the matter drift into internal silence. He kept it formal and public-facing at the same time. He notified the relevant oversight office, submitted a separate privacy governance memorandum on the misuse of legal authority during home contacts, and requested a policy review on consent search training. He was not just building a complaint against Tanner, he was building a record against the system that trained him. That widened the damage. Local reporters got hold of the story within days, not the full footage at first. Just the outline. Patrol officer demands entry into private home without warrant. Resident turns out to be privacy commissioner. Department opens internal investigation. That was enough. Once the existence of video became known, the story spread quickly. And it spread for a simple reason. People recognized the pattern. A lot of residents had their own version of the story. An officer talks like he already has the right. A citizen gets pressured into cooperating. The line between request and command gets blurred on purpose. Most cases never become national examples because the resident doesn't have cameras, legal knowledge, or a title that forces institutions to pay attention. This one had all three. That's why the public response hit hard. Civil liberties groups called it a textbook unlawful entry attempt. Former prosecutors said Tanner's legal reasoning made no sense. Retired judges speaking generally about search law pointed out the same thing Rowan had said at the door. A home is not searchable because an officer feels suspicious. The threshold matters. The warrant requirement matters. Consent has to be real. Pressure does not make it real. Inside the department, the case was turning toxic. Command staff now had two problems: the footage itself, and the fact that Tanner might not be an isolated problem. If one patrol officer was this comfortable inventing authority at someone's front door, supervisors had to answer the next question. How often had that tactic worked on people who did not know better? That question scared them more than Tanner did. By the second week, investigators had enough to move from review to recommendation. The findings were shaping up around 4 points: false statement of legal authority, attempted unlawful residential entry, coercive consent tactics, and inaccurate post-incident reporting. Any one of those could lead to major discipline. Together, they put termination on the table. Tanner started looking for a way out. He reportedly told colleagues the situation had been blown out of proportion because of who Rowan was. That argument went nowhere. Rowan's title had not created the misconduct. It had only prevented it from being buried. That's an important difference. If Tanner had done the same thing to a teacher, a mechanic, a nurse, or an elderly homeowner with no camera system, he might have walked away from it. That was the real scandal underneath the scandal, and everyone could see it now. By the end of the second week, the department had the footage, the reports, the witness statements, the dispatch logs, and the prior complaints lined up in one file. At that point, Tanner's problem was no longer the front porch. It was the fact that the whole record told the same story. The investigation ended Tanner's career. Internal Affairs found that he had no legal basis to enter the home, used false legal authority, tried to pressure consent, and then changed his wording in the report after the fact. The video made all of it easy to prove. He demanded entry, claimed reasonable suspicion allowed it, failed to identify any emergency, and then put his hand on the door and moved toward the threshold. The department fired him. Then the state certification board opened its own review. That mattered almost as much as the firing. Losing one job is one thing. Losing certification means other departments see the same record and the same risk. That's how a career really ends. Rowan kept the case focused on law and procedure. He made it clear this was not about personal status. It was about an officer trying to replace legal authority with pressure at the door of a private home. The fallout didn't stop with Tanner. The department had to review training, rewrite parts of its consent search guidance, and tighten rules for home entry contacts. Officers were retrained on the basic standards they should already have known. A home requires a warrant, valid consent, or an actual emergency. Suspicion alone is not enough. That was the real impact of the case. Tanner lost his job, but the bigger issue was exposed too. If Rowan had not known the law and had not had cameras, Tanner might have gotten away with it. That's the lesson. A badge does not erase civil rights. A demand is not the same as lawful authority. And the people who get away with overreach usually stop only when someone knows the law and forces the record to speak for itself. Tell me what you would have done in that situation.